Hey there, life group leaders. It's Pastor Kevin here. I just want to thank you so much for your leadership and the role that you play in helping people truly know, live, and share Jesus. Thank you for the environments that you create and just being available to lead your group, whether you serve as a leader, a coordinator, a host, whatever your role is. I just really appreciate you so much. And I really hope that you had a great first week in this series of What Would Jesus Undo? I've had many conversations with different people already who were so blessed by their life group time this week. I've heard great stories of people really unpacking this topic of unforgiveness and seeing how they have been holding some bitterness and some slander and some anger towards other brothers and sisters in the faith. And so that's just incredible for me to hear those stories that, people in your groups that you're connecting with, that you're leading and that you're investing in, that it's making a difference in their spiritual walk. So thank you so much for those environments that you create and your leadership. And I'm going to keep praying for you that you just continue to have great conversations. In week 2 of our series, What Would Jesus Undo? We're talking about a really great subject. It's a subject that's really passionate to my heart, and it's the topic of hollow worship. Now, just for way of definition, what does hollow worship mean? Well, hollow worship means worship that is done in vain. And that comes directly from the teachings of Jesus when he was confronting the religious Pharisees who were upset with Jesus and his disciples because of the mode that they were worshiping God. You see, the Pharisees had this big religious system, and the mode of worship, the method of worship, had become the priority to them. And Jesus has to call those religious leaders out. And he uses a harsh term. He calls them hypocrites. No one likes to be thought of as a hypocrite. But that's what Jesus calls these religious leaders, that the method, the mode of worship was more important to these people than the heart of worship. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week in our groups. And I just want to remind you, as you lead your group this week, that in English, I think worship becomes a difficult topic for us to unpack because we get the term confused between the two different usages of the word. The first usage is that our lives are lived as a spiritual act of worship. How we handle our jobs. Maybe people in your groups are in jobs that they don't really like, or they're in school and they don't really like, the program they're in. Well, they could still live their lives. They can handle school. They can handle their jobs as a spiritual act of worship unto God. Or even in the topic of unforgiveness, right? Forgiving someone or seeking forgiveness is how they're living their lives as a spiritual act of worship. How we're generous, with our time and with our resources is a spiritual act of worship. But what Jesus is talking about in Matthew chapter 15 isn't the topic of living our lives as worship. He's talking about the praise and adoration of God. How we bring our hearts into the presence of God through the praise of God. You see, nowhere does Jesus or the apostles do away with corporate worship. There's our private lives that are spiritual acts of worship, and there's our corporate lives that we bring praise to God. And Jesus is challenging each of us to look at our hearts, and is our worship in vain? Is the method more important than the heart? So there's some great conversations that you're going to have. I just want to highlight a few of the questions that you may want to focus on in your life group time. Right? The first would be to even just talk about with your group, have them describe what a meaningful expression of worship in church looks like to them. You see, we all come from different backgrounds, we all come from different traditions, and we all kind of come together here at Greenbelt. But what does a meaningful expression of worship mean to them? Is it, let's just get through the songs and get to the sermon because that's more important to them? Is it, they prefer the choir, they prefer it loud, they prefer it quiet? And what's amazing about this topic is there's no right or wrong answer. Even though there's a lot of Christian movements that want to focus on one method more than another and say this method is biblical, as we're going to see on Sunday, when you unpack the verses, there is not one method that is biblical. It's about the heart. I can even think back of some of my most meaningful expressions of worship. Some of the best worship experiences I've ever been a part of were actually not even done in English. They were in a language that I didn't know. It was in a style of music that was completely uncomfortable to me, but it was probably the most profound experience I ever had in worshiping God with people from a different culture in a different language, and it was beautiful to be a part of that. So talk about meaningful expressions of worship in church with your group. Right. Another thing to talk about with your group is just how we live out this worship. Like, why is Jesus so harsh to people who are so obsessed with the mode? And we have to challenge our groups is, do we allow our hearts to get hardened because of the mode? And so you could ask them the simple question, why do you think people get bent out of shape when it comes to the mode of worship? Right? Why do we get so bent out of shape when, oh, we didn't sing the song I like, we didn't do it in the style I like? What is going on in our hearts when it comes to experiencing different styles of worship? Right? And then finally, a great topic to talk about is, how would you explain what we do on Sunday morning to someone who's never been to church before? Right? If you invite a friend from school or a colleague from work to join you on a Sunday morning, how would you walk them through what's happening on Sunday to help them understand it completely? So I really hope your group this week will be exciting, will create some great conversations, and will move people forward in leading them in knowing, living, and sharing Jesus. I pray for you as a leader and coordinator and host that you should have a wonderful week talking about hollow worship. Again, thank you so much for how you serve. And if you need any help with your group, please don't hesitate to contact your life group coach. I'm sure they are anxious to work with you and to talk with you and to help you in any way that they can. So God bless you, and may you have an amazing week in your life group.